name is Jay Edwards, and remember, the answers given on the show do not constitute legal advice and do not create an attorney-client relationship. For legal advice, you can call the office anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That's spelled D-E-W-I-T-T, 1-800-DeWitt-Law, or you can interact with the show by sending us an email. Just send it to ask@dewittlaw.com, or you can also call and leave a voicemail at 407-53-MOSES. Every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. right here, you'll learn how Florida's legal issues affect you with your host, Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. Mo will answer your questions to discuss the latest legal issues affecting the citizens of Central Florida. And we're going to get to plenty of those questions that you guys have emailed us. Again, ask@dewittlaw.com. We'll get to those coming up all throughout the morning this morning, anywhere from divorce to got a ticket to something that's going to relate to everybody listening right now. But first, let's start off, Mo, with the Murdaugh trial. I don't know a ton about it, but it's an interesting case, and for anybody that's listening right now that might not know exactly what's going on with it, give us kind of the cliff notes on it.
Yeah, so the Murdaugh trial, Alec Murdaugh, he was an attorney. He's now disbarred, but he was an attorney in South Carolina, and his kind of family had sort of run this area of South Carolina for a long period of time. It's called the Low Country in South Carolina.
Okay, yeah.
I think it kind of encompasses like 12 counties over there. And so basically his, grandfather or great-grandfather or something like that was essentially the head prosecutor in this area.
A lot of pull, a lot of power.
A lot of pull, a lot of power. His family's had a law firm there, which that was one thing that was kind of unique, is they let the family operate a civil practice while, his family was in the prosecutor's office as well. So there was kind of a lot of inner dealings there. But basically, everybody in this area knew this individual. He had a lot of power. And he's now been charged with the murder of his son and his wife.
Right.
And so, if you're not familiar with the history, which I think it's been pretty well, publicized, but he got into all sorts of financial issues. He was stealing money from his law firm. He was addicted to opioids.
Oy.
Then his son had a boating accident that killed a young girl. The girl's family was suing him. The son was facing criminal charges from the boating accident. Then he said that somebody tried to kill him and tried to shoot him in the head, and it kind of nixed his head or something like that, and he survived. It turns out, or the story now is, that he basically hired a hitman to kill himself in order to collect $10 million in life insurance.
Whoa.
So, and then, of course, his wife and his son were brutally murdered basically execution style. So that's the trial that's going on right now.
Wow.
So a lot to unpack there. I mean, you really couldn't write this if you tried.
It's like
as a movie.
Crazy Hollywood movie, yeah.
It really is. And, there's still a lot of things. Right now, we're on the prosecution's case. So the defense should start their case next week and start putting on their defense. It's going to be very interesting to see what they put on there, if they have any defense to this, and kind of what their arguments are. But there still are some things that don't make sense. And so one of the big questions here is, what was the motive in this guy killing his own son and his own wife? Some people have said, well, the son who died was the one who was operating the boat
that killed the girl.
So some people said, well, he killed his son to try to get rid of that lawsuit because they were suing him for $10 million. But that doesn't really make sense, because they were suing him directly anyways, whether his son was there or not.
They came after Dad on it?
They came after Dad because Dad owned the boat. Dad basically allowed the kids to drink on the boat. There was a number of factors that basically opened Dad up to liability.
And Dad's got the money, not the son.
Right.
Yeah.
They really didn't care anything about the son, because you're right, the son doesn't have any money. And then what was the motive to kill the wife? Well, some people say the wife had some money of her own that he was trying to get. That was $5 million. But then to kill your son execution style doesn't really make sense in that motive. Other people say that he just killed his wife, and I think this is what the prosecutors are saying in the case, is that he killed his wife and son to get sympathy, which that seems like a heck of a motive.
Man.
I've dealt with I've seen a lot of bad people over the years, and even the worst of the worst, that seems like just a motive that I find a hard time wrapping my head around.
Right. Feel bad for me. My wife's dead, but I killed her.
Yeah, because basically, I think a few days before this happened, he had been confronted about some of the financial crimes in his law firm by the other partners there. That was kind of discovered at that point. And so their theory is, well, he went and killed his wife and son to basically have a distraction from that.
Look over here.
Right. Look over here. Poor me. Don't look at
the case at hand.
Right. Which I think he's been charged with over 100 counts of financial crimes. I think there's even some drug crimes involved there. And I don't know all the details about this stuff. And it's still coming out through the trial. Obviously, nobody really knows all the evidence at this point in time. But it's just a wild and crazy case, frankly. One of the craziest cases I think I've ever really seen, frankly.
Isn't there some point, I saw some kind of highlight on the news, I don't know, like a week ago, and they were playing some audio. And I remember like the headline was something along the lines of, did he just confess? Did he say that he did it? And I remember them playing it over and over. And I only caught a second of it, but I was like, wait, what was that? What did he just say? So I don't know. I mean, if there's audio of something, but who knows? It's a very interesting case, and this is going to go on for a while, isn't it?
There's at least another week or two left in the trial. It's going to be, they've unpacked a lot of interesting evidence as far as, cell phone data. And one of the things that they were waiting on, which will be interesting to see if they let it come into the trial or not, is the actual OnStar data from his vehicle. So one of the questions, of course, the wife and the son were murdered at this property. I think it was a hunting property where they had, kennels for the dogs and stuff like that. So one of the questions, of course, was the father there at the time of the murders? They were able to narrow the time of the murder down pretty well based on cell phone data, because they can see the last time that the son and the mother opened their cell phone. Last time it was unlocked.
Active on it, okay.
Active on it. There was some communication via text, via Snapchat, right before it was locked for the last time, and then nobody opened it up. So they have the window of the murders down to a pretty small window. The question, of course, was Alec Murdaugh at the property at that time? And so one of the things that they were trying to get was the OnStar data from the vehicle, from his vehicle. And they had a difficult time getting that from OnStar directly. And so my understanding is they have just gotten that now in the middle of the trial. It's finally been delivered to them. And so what does it show? Obviously, that's not argumentative data. That is data. Where was the vehicle? Maybe they can argue he wasn't in it. That's probably a tougher argument. But where was the vehicle? And so it creates a problem. Obviously, depending on what it says, it could create a problem for either side, because the prosecution here has laid out a theory that he was at this property, how he was at the property, why he was at the property, and what the time frame of the murders was. So if that OnStar data shows he wasn't there, they may have to move for a mistrial, because their whole theory of the case has now been blown up, and they have to start with a new theory. Of course, the defense could, depending what it shows, the defense could make a similar argument here, if it's even admissible in court. I don't think they've had the motion on that yet as to whether the judge is going to let that data come in. But certainly, depending what it shows, it could be a game changer for either side, and it certainly could change the theory of this case.
So in the case of a mistrial for the prosecution, and it does show that, no, he was at a fast food restaurant at that time, there's his car, and they do a mistrial. Does that mean everything's done, or does that mean they just start over and come up with a new theory?
They would have to start again and come up with a new theory. Now, that could be problematic for the prosecution, given how highly publicized this case has been. When they did jury selection in this case, the judge asked the potential jurors, I think it was a pool of over 100 people, how many of you have heard about this case? And every single person in the room stood up. So especially in this area where this trial is occurring, it is such a highly publicized case that the public knows the theory, or has known the theory for a good period of time.
Right.
So for them to now say, whoops, and have to change that could be quite detrimental for their ability to get a conviction on this case.
Can they move it completely, like out of state, like bring it to Florida or something like that and get jurors from here, or it doesn't work that way?
It would be very difficult for them to move it out of state because of jurisdictional issues, right?
Okay.
The South Carolina is the state with jurisdiction in this matter. It's not a federal case, so federal, you could move it to different states because those are federal courts. But here, since it's a state court, it would most likely have to remain within the state, but they could certainly move it to a different area of the state. And that brings up an interesting issue is, during the trial, because his family is so involved in this area, that they actually had to remove portraits of his family members from the courtroom.
Stop.
Because they had portraits of his family members on the wall in the courtroom.
Whoa.
So, I mean, that just shows how intertwined his family is with the judicial system in this area.
Wow. And I mean, you would automatically think, like, there's no way he's going to, somebody's going to end up getting a fair shake out of this with how involved and closely connected he is with the legal system. But I mean, you do the crime. Hopefully they figure it out and piece it all together.
Well, and that's kind of what they're saying is this guy, his family kind of wielded so much power that he was basically saying, he kind of had an ego where he could never get caught for anything. He could do whatever he wanted, so on and so forth. So obviously, the House of Cards has fallen at this point. He's now on trial for a double murder, a premeditated double murder. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The other interesting thing, and I haven't heard the prosecution really speak to this theory yet, is they're saying that there was two guns. That basically there was a rifle and an assault rifle that killed the wife and the son, the mother and the son.
Right.
So a lot of people believe that would lead to thinking there was two murderers, because typically you don't walk around with an assault rifle in one hand and a shotgun in the other.
Yeah.
And so they haven't really spoken too much to that theory, because certainly you don't walk in, shoot somebody, place your gun on the ground, pick up the other gun. It doesn't really make sense.
No.
And of course, there's been conspiracy theories, or maybe they're valid theories, that this was more of a hit because Alec Murdaugh was in trouble with people who were involved with either gambling or drugs. Obviously, had a lot of financial issues, given the money he was stealing. So there's been a lot of different theories thrown out there. It'll be interesting to see what the evidence actually shows. Again, at this point in time, they haven't really spoken to that evidence or rebutted that evidence. They've talked a little bit about the bullets used, but they haven't really talked about whether there's a one-person or two-person shooter, at least not yet. I think it's going to come out at some point, because it has to, basically.
I barely find enough time in the day to, get dressed and bathed and work and, kids and dinner and hobbies and stuff like that. How does a person like that go through life with people chasing them for debt, maybe for drugs? You are now, just charged with a double murder. It's like, how do you sleep at night at all, ever? Like, with all this weighing on you? I guess don't do the crimes, first of all, and you don't have to worry about it. But that's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm no expert when it comes to opioid addiction, but, as we've seen before, people who get involved in drugs and this kind of thing, it can take them down a very dark path. And I think maybe that's what happened here. He's openly admitted to, being addicted to opioids. I think they even maybe said that he went to rehab a couple times. Who knows what the true extent of that is, or if maybe that's just another fabrication, another lie to try to make people feel bad for him. Who knows?
Well, now you got me wanting to watch this whole case. It's I know I won't understand a lot of it, but man, how crazy.
It is very fascinating, in my opinion. It's something I've been kind of glued to a little bit. That at least down here, I don't think we've had as much coverage of. It's certainly been in the news, but not as much as it is in South Carolina, obviously. But I always kind of boil it down to why would somebody do something like this? Because it's really one of the most horrific crimes you could think of. I mean, someone to murder their own son,
your son
and their spouse, in cold blood like that, and premeditated as well. Because clearly it had to be planned, with no real motive that we can figure out. Just doesn't make sense.
No, not at all. Well, we'll have to follow up on this in the upcoming weeks. I can't wait to see where this goes. Do you remember a couple weeks ago when I told you I was going to ask you the dumbest question you've ever been asked in your life?
You're going to supersede that this week?
I think I've topped it, so I'll have that coming up for you in just a few minutes, and we're going to get to your questions as well. If you've got one, send it to us at ask@dewittlaw.com. You can always call and leave a voicemail if that's easier. We'll play your question over the air, and then Mo will give you some advice. 407-53 Moses. And if you just want to call the office and get some legal advice, you can call anytime, 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That is 1-800-DeWitt-Law. We'll be back coming up in just a few minutes. Thanks so much for listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
All right, the crash happened. I was at a stop. The car was coming in, rear-ended me from behind. I was trying to get out of the way, but yeah, that didn't happen. Yeah. After the crash, I just kind of sat down for a couple minutes, gather my thoughts, after the ambulance and stuff. Got discharged, went home. I was really trying to think about what to do next because, that was my first accident. Of course, you hear all the time, call an attorney, call an attorney. So I wasn't really sure what route. I reached out to a friend of mine, and she was just like, hey, I have someone you can reach out to. And she said, just call Mo.
Many of our clients are referred to us by friends and family, just like in Jamal's case. It was an honor to be able to represent him and ultimately fight to get him the compensation that he deserved.
My experience with Mo was it was really good. His team, his staff, very informative. I received all the information I needed, step by step. They made sure I was satisfied with everything, and everything has been really good. They're very detailed. They're very, they call or text whenever they make a move or whatever they're doing. They're mailing out a letter, anything. I'm always in the know. So that's really good on their part. So yeah, if a friend or a family member, anyone would ever ask me if they need an attorney, I'll always say, just call Mo.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm, taking your questions, giving you some legal advice. You can email those questions to ask@dewittlaw.com or call 407-53-MOSES. Leave a voicemail right there. We'll play your voicemail if that's easier, and then Mo will give you some advice. And then, Mo, how does somebody contact the office? What's the website if they'd like to get more information on you and your team?
Yeah, give us a call anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. It's 1-800-339-4885, or go to DeWittLaw.com. And, of course, as we talked about before, you can also get a copy of DeWitt's Guide to Divorce, which is a book that kind of guides you through the divorce process. If that's something that you or a loved one is facing, you can get that free, download a free copy at DeWittDivorce.com.
Perfect. All right, let's get to your questions. First one is nice, short, and sweet. I don't know if the answer. Oh, no, I got to ask you my dumb question. I forgot about that. Let me ask you that. When it comes to, you were talking just a minute ago about the Murdaugh trial, just a few minutes ago, and the prosecution. Does the prosecution always goes first, or is it like in a football game, there's a coin flip?
No, they always go first, at least in Florida, and I assume same as true in South Carolina, since that's what we're seeing. I don't know if there's any other states that do it differently. I kind of think probably not.
Okay.
Just because that's kind of how our judicial system goes. The prosecution goes, and then the defense puts on their case typically.
Gotcha. Okay, so maybe it wasn't the dumbest question ever. All right. Okay, so here's a question for you. Can I receive alimony in a relationship for 40 years in Florida, but we were never married?
So we get this question all the time. And, Florida is one of the states that does not recognize common law marriage. So other states do recognize, there are some states that do recognize common law marriage. Florida is not one of them. So even if you've been living together for 40 years, you would not be legally married. So you would not be entitled to alimony. Now, that being said, if you purchase property together and things like that, then there may be certain actions, whether it's a partition action, if it's a piece of real estate that's owned together, as far as your entitlement to half of what was acquired, assuming it's in joint names. Mm-hmm. Again, if you're not married in Florida, you'd have no legal right to something in the other person's name. Now, there have been arguments made before where there's been a case, I think, where it was in Oregon, because I think Oregon recognized common law marriage, where they had a religious ceremony, a religious wedding ceremony. They lived together there for an extended period of time, but they never legally got married, and then moved to Florida. And the Florida courts basically said, no, you're not legally married. We don't recognize common law marriage here. We're not going to recognize the common law marriage out of Oregon, which it was a complicated analysis because typically we have what's called full faith and credit. Mm-hmm. And so usually we're going to recognize if someone breaks a law in another state or has a contract or something in another state, Florida is going to recognize that under that state's laws. I'm kind of oversimplifying here. But in this situation, because common law marriage could be, it's a very loosely defined term. That's the kind of the point of marriage is the parties intended. And so then you have to go to the parties' intent. The courts basically said, no, we're not going to recognize it.
So what happens if somebody gets married in Florida and the officiant or the bride or the groom never send in that marriage certificate? You accidentally, I thought you did it. Well, I thought you did it. We thought we've been married for 7 years and it was never filed with the state. Are you married?
Possibly not. So, I mean, there's been some very high-profile cases even here in Florida where that has been the argument, and a lot of times the court has found that they were not legally married, which the biggest thing when it comes to whether you're legally married or not is oftentimes alimony. Because, of course, if you have children together, there's still child support, there's still time sharing and custody and things of that nature. And like I said before, any property that's owned jointly, you're still entitled to your equity in that property. However, when it comes to alimony, the only way you get alimony is if you're married.
Right.
So that's oftentimes, really what they're arguing over when they're trying to invalidate the marriage or not. I mean, another, interesting case we had a while back was we had a case where the parties were married, or at least they thought they were married in Florida. But the husband, I'm going to change the fact pattern here a little bit to keep it, anonymous. The husband had previously gotten a divorce in another country. He got one of these like quickie divorces, which I think was popular, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I think Michael Jackson actually may have done this too. You fly to another country, you get divorced there, and then you claim to be divorced. Well, the divorce was completely invalid. So he was still married when he got married to this next person.
Oh boy.
Which invalidated the second marriage. So the court in that case found that the second marriage was completely invalid, and so there was no alimony. And that was that.
Crazy. All these times you think you're married and turns out, nope, you are not. And I'm sure it happens more than we probably think. Like, I thought you sent it. No, I thought you sent it.
And those are long and complicated cases. I mean, the case I'm speaking of, I changed the fact pattern to keep it confidential, but frankly, it went all the way up through the Florida court system.
Wow.
So it's publicly available out there. It's it's kind of a landmark case at this point.
There's another Hollywood movie right there.
Yeah, so.
All right, more of your questions coming up. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
If you follow me for a while now, you know that I'm always posting stupid videos on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that. But what allows me to be able to do that and what allows me to be on vacation right now is the amazing team that's behind me who's fighting for our clients in court every day. So just because you see me out here on vacation doesn't mean that we're not in the courtroom right now fighting hard. It's just not me, it's the team that's behind me.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. For legal advice, you can call the office anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. That's 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. Interact with the show by sending us an email, ask@dewittlaw.com. That comes in here to the inbox, and then we'll read your question on the air, and you can get some advice from Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm, or also call and leave a voicemail, 407-53-MOSES. That's 407-53-MOSES. Mo will answer your questions to discuss the latest legal issues affecting the citizens of Central Florida. All right, on to our next question from our listeners. Mo, I worked for a general contractor for 3 months at the end of 2022, and I've been paid about 70% of my total of labor and supplies that I provided. I'm still owed about $4,500. I invoiced the contractor in November and nothing. I'm concerned I won't get the final payment because the contractor stopped responding to my texts, my emails, my phone calls regarding the status of my final payout. During the project, our communication was seamless. I would like to have a game plan and get ahead of this by knowing my legal rights and best course of action moving forward. How long should I wait before taking legal action?
Well, so assuming that they're wages, we'd have to know a little bit more about the relationship between him and the contractor. Was he a subcontractor? He probably was a subcontractor. Was there a contract in place, or were they considered wages? Was he, a 1099 or some sort of wages that were owed to him? If they're wages in Florida and you sue them and you prevail, you can also get your attorney's fees. There's a prevailing party attorney's fees provision under that.
Okay.
And that's very powerful because, even if you collect $500 in wages, there could be $25,000 in legal fees that the employer now has to pay.
Right.
And of course, that's there to try to keep the employer honest and not fail to pay people wages, because that's a bad thing. Obviously, if he's more of a subcontractor or an independent third party, and there's a contract in place, and hopefully that contract's written, then it's going to come down to the terms of the contract. But he asks, how long should I wait? Well, typically I'd recommend sending a letter, sending it regular and certified mail, giving them 30 days to respond to it. And then if they don't respond within 30 days, making sure, go ahead and file a lawsuit against them. You put them on notice. You've asked them to make it right. They clearly knew about it. There's no oral communications. It's all in writing, contained in the letter. They got it. And again, as we've talked about before, if you send it regular and certified mail, even if they don't pick up the certified copy, it's deemed to be delivered. So send it both ways.
Okay.
And then, From there, make sure you're well within the statute of limitations, of course. If you're up against the statute of limitations, you want to file that right away. So don't wait a long time. I don't know how long it's been already.
Right. I think he said November, the end of 2022.
Okay.
Paid
so,
about 70%. So not too long.
Yeah. So if you just wait 30 days and then file a lawsuit, you should be okay on that. But then, I'd go ahead and file a lawsuit if they're not going to respond to you, if they're not going to pay you what they owe you.
So if, let's say after the 30 days they don't respond, let's say this individual comes to you and wants to file a lawsuit against them with you. And then all of a sudden now this contractor goes, okay, you call my bluff, I'll pay.
Right.
If there's fees involved with you for that, even though this person backed off and it never went to court or anything like that, do they now have to incur those costs as well?
Well, that's part of the settlement negotiations, basically.
Okay.
So the only way to force them to pay your legal fees is to go to trial and have a judge order it.
Gotcha.
But, depending on the situation and depending if they have a good attorney who maybe recognizes, hey, if this goes to trial, you're going to owe a lot more in fees. Maybe they're going to advise them that, hey, as part of a settlement, we should go ahead and pay the fees that are incurred now because otherwise they're just going to continue to add up.
Right.
And so we see that a lot with HOA lawsuits, homeowners association lawsuits, because again, in homeowners association lawsuits, typically, if the homeowners association prevails, they can get all their attorney's fees, and then they can foreclose on your property to collect their attorney's fees. So it's a very powerful provision there as well. So that's one of those situations where, oftentimes it feels like the homeowner is being gouged for attorney's fees, and I think in some cases they may be getting gouged by the attorneys because the attorneys basically know that there's a big risk if the homeowner fights them because they could fight them all the way to trial and argue that the attorney's fees are not reasonable. But in doing that, they're still probably going to incur a lot more in attorney's fees, and they still risk having to pay the full amount of the attorney's fees, which, again, they can collect on because they can foreclose in your house.
Right.
So it's
tough.
Yeah, it's a very tough situation. And that's probably one of the reasons people hate homeowners associations, along with many others. But it can be very tough. But that's one of those things where you do need good legal advice to advise you of, okay, what's the potential consequence here in sort of the worst case scenario or the best case scenario? Because you kind of want to know both sides of that. What am I potentially liable for here? You don't just want to be operating blindly and then say, oh, surprise, now you have $50,000 in attorney's fees to somebody. Because you were fighting them over a $500 issue.
Right. I mean, and this guy's $4,500, and it sounds like some of it was already out of pocket because he already provided some of the supplies. It's not just his labor, which is, of course, is your time, and time is money. But, if you're shelling out a couple grand in lumber or whatever the supplies are, you want to get that back. That's no small chunk of change.
Yeah. I mean, I had a situation one time with an individual who was being sued by a homeowners association. And the homeowners association said that they owed the homeowners association dues, which obviously you have to pay if you live in a HOA that requires dues. And he said, no, I paid them all. And then it came down to a situation of the association was basically saying that his dues were late, so he owed the late fees on it. And so now we're basically arguing over like $150 in late fees.
Man.
But, each side is basically arguing that they're entitled to tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees.
Right.
And so, I mean, this went on for years and years. And finally, it basically settled out because both parties had liability there as to whether these fees were actually late or not. And they both knew, depending where, there was an argument on both sides, and depending where the court landed, they could be on the hook for a big chunk of change, essentially.
It was like, let's just settle this and be done.
Yeah. But it took a long time to get to that point, frankly.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the next question. Again, you can send these to ask@dewittlaw.com. I'm 19 years old, never had anything on my record. I just got my first speeding ticket, 68 and a 35. I'm worried. What will they do?
68 and a 35. I mean, that is quite a bit over the speed limit. I'm assuming you probably have to have a court appearance on that.
That's 33 over.
That's 33 over. Yeah. So typically on that fast of a speed, they're going to make you appear in court. You probably want to hire an attorney for that. Now, the good thing is that since you do have a clean driving record, because that is one of the things that the judges look at if you've ever been to traffic court.
Right. They
have your little printout there with your record, and if you have a bunch of speeding tickets on it, usually doesn't go very well.
Right.
So since you have a clean record, that should certainly be beneficial. But I would hire an attorney. They're going to know how to navigate that process the best way for you. There may be certain ways to get that dismissed, knocked down, or you may be looking at points on your license. Sometimes if you have a clean record, they can request to waive the points. if you pay the fine and so on and so forth, or take a class. But slow down, obviously. But I would, for traffic tickets, you can usually hire an attorney for a pretty low price. So I would probably go ahead and do that because, you could be facing some serious consequences given how fast the speed is there.
When does it constitute like a reckless driving charge as opposed to just a speeding ticket?
So reckless driving can really be pretty discretionary based on the officer. Things like, improper lane changes at a high rate of speed, not paying attention. There's a lot of things that can qualify as reckless driving. So that's really more up to the discretion of the officer.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like a disorderly conduct charge almost. It's like, what is disorderly conduct? Well, I guess you kind of know it when you see it, right?
Right. So I've been tailing you, and man, you are driving crazily on,
Right.
on the roads. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, now I did have an officer one time. I was actually driving to court in Polk County, and he pulled me over. He pulled me and the person behind me over. And he said, "Oh, the person back there said you were swerving in and out of traffic." I was like, "I've been in this lane forever. I mean, I'm in no hurry. I'm just kind of zoned out. It's like an hour and a half drive over to Polk County." But what he was trying to get me to do was basically admit to that and be like, "Oh, I was just swerving a little bit or something." So he could basically write me a ticket for reckless driving. I think that's my
That was
opinion.
a reach, huh?
Yeah, that was like, I don't know what you're talking about because I really wasn't.
Right.
But they're asking you questions to try to get you to admit to things. And I was speeding because the speed limit dropped 10 miles an hour and he was waiting right where it dropped. But,
Did I ever tell you that I was driving home from Alabama eating chicken nuggets in the car?
you did tell me this
I
story.
got stopped for a DUI, and it turns out I was just dipping my nuggets in sauce. So I went over the line a couple times, and they stopped me.
Well, the three, distracted driving, I think, is the number one reason for car accidents.
Oh, sure. I was wrong. Trust
Yeah.
me. I know I was wrong. I admitted to it. He goes, "You're an idiot." I'm like, I know. I was like 20.
Yeah.
I was dumb,
But the main main three forms of distracted driving are texting, or using a cell phone, eating, and changing the radio. So keep your dial on the station.
See, there you go. Perfect message right there from Mo DeWitt. All right, next question. Yeah, we got time. I was separated from my wife for 11 years, but never divorced. Assets were divided at time, but now can I contest that? I had signed assets division, but made a mistake and got much less than her. Could I legally ask to get some compensation from her? I don't understand this, but maybe you do.
I don't really understand it either, but we'll try to work through it here. So
Separated from 11 years, never divorced.
So it sounds like they reached some sort of agreement on their own, but that agreement's really not official until it's recorded in a court as part of the divorce.
As a divorce.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go into some general information here that may help this individual. Basically, as part of a divorce, the court can choose 3 dates to divide assets. They can choose the date of separation, the date you file the divorce, or the date that the divorce is finalized.
Is there one that's better than the other that people hope for?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, and they're supposed to choose one of those 3 dates based on what's fair to the parties. And that date can change for each asset, too. So, for example, if you have a 401k that's just getting passive gains, you're not contributing to it anymore, it's just getting passive gains, and let's say you filed for divorce, it takes 2 years to get divorced. Well, in that case, the judge would probably use the date that the divorce is finalized because those are passive gains based on money that was put in there during the marriage. But in that same situation, if the individual is contributing to the 401k during the divorce, the judge may say, well, that money there was contributed after the date of separation or after the date of filing, and those are really non-marital funds. So the person who's contributing them should be entitled to those, and the other side should only be entitled to the passive gains on those. So you're going to have to look at each asset individually. Now, here, if you've been separated for 11 years, and I've had this case too, where they've been separated, 15, 20 years sometimes, and then you go to get divorced. Now, certainly things can get messy, and, sometimes you may be separated, but there may still be financial support. Oftentimes they argue, yeah, we were separated, but then we moved back in together, so we weren't really separated, then we moved out again. So date of separation itself can sometimes be a messy argument. But there again, if you were truly separated for 11 years and you're buying property after the date of separation, in my opinion, what would be fair is whoever bought that property, that would be their non-marital funds, assuming they use non-marital funds, and that would be their property. Now, it's a little different too. If you take, let's say you guys have a savings account with $50,000 in it from the marriage, you guys separate, and you go take 30 grand out and buy a car, you can't now claim that that car is non-marital because it was purchased with marital funds.
Gotcha.
So you can see how this can get messy very
yeah.
quickly.
Mhm.
It's kind of all about tracking the dollars and seeing where they move around and what dollars came really, kind of during the marriage and what dollars came after they either separated or filed the divorce.
Interesting. I never knew that about the 3 different dates.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you don't really think about, and you don't really think about the consequences of that as well.
Right.
And obviously, we've seen that a little bit now with, kind of the real estate market sort of being, it was way up last year. Now it's
Right.
maybe down a little bit. So then what date are you using to
Yeah.
value homes? Especially when the market was real crazy. 1 month we'd be using $350 for the house. The next month we'd be using $420 for the house.
Right.
It was all over the place. So, I mean, it can get messy real quick. I always say, it's pretty easy to decide, there's no argument that all property that was acquired during the marriage, with some minimal exceptions, is split 50-50. The question is always who gets what and how much is it worth?
Right.
And usually the argument is how much is it worth?
Interesting stuff. And I bet a lot of this stuff is covered in your book, especially when it comes to separation and divorce. Am I right?
It absolutely is.
Can you tell us the name of it again and where people can pick up a copy of it?
Yeah, it's DeWitt's Guide to Divorce. And it's a divorce guide for anyone going through divorce in Florida, or if you have a loved one, get it for them. You can download a copy at DeWittDivorce.com. It is also available for purchase on Amazon and should be on Audible soon. We're working on getting on there.
And when Mo has me over to the house to watch the Murdoch case together so he can explain it to me, I'm going to bring my copy over there so he can sign it for me.
There you
like,
go.
Not like that was my invitation over to your house. Not like I don't see every Sunday, right?
This is true.
All right. More of your questions coming up. Plus, our Mo Pro Tip of the Week is on the way. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. And for that legal advice, call the office anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. That's spelled DEWITT, 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. If you'd like to get some legal advice or if it's something that you want to participate here on the show, we would love to get your question, your email. Just send it to us, ask@DeWittLaw.com. ask@DeWittLaw.com. We'll be back with the DeWitt Law Review coming up in just a few minutes right here on WDBO.
Story time. So I want to tell you a little story about a call I got about a year ago. This guy gave me a call. He was just in a car accident. And I talked to him for a while. I told him what to do. Told him he needed to go seek medical treatment and get checked out. He said, thank you. I appreciate your time, but I'm not going to hire you. So not a problem. If you have any questions, concerns, let me know. Happy to talk to you anytime. About 2 weeks later, I was actually in the Bahamas. About 2 weeks later, he called me back and he goes, spoke to the insurance company. They're offering me $770 and they're saying I'm 30% at fault for the accident. You're hired. Sent him the paperwork, got him signed up. That was about a year ago. Today, we just settled his case for $100,000. The insurance company wanted to pay him $770 to resolve that claim. And this is just a prime example as why you should never settle with the insurance company that soon after an accident. You don't know what your injuries are. You haven't gotten checked out by a doctor. You don't know if you're going to need surgery or if there's a tear in a ligament or something more substantial. So when the insurance company offers you quick money after an accident, typically they're offering you pennies on the dollar to go away. And the last thing they want you to do is to hire an attorney because they don't want to pay you the fair compensation that you deserve.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm, taking your questions, giving you legal advice. Send those emails to ask@DeWittLaw.com. It's ask@DeWittLaw.com. You can also call anytime if that's easier and just leave a voicemail. Tell us what's going on and Mo will give you some advice. That number is 407-53-MOSES, 407-53-MOSES. Or if you just want to call the office, not necessarily be on the air, but want to get some legal advice, you can call 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. It is 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. We've got our Mo Pro Tip of the Week coming up in just a couple minutes. But first, Mo, got this question for you that somebody wants to know. I just got 50-50 custody of my children. Which parent will receive my disabled daughter's SSDI benefits? She currently gets the benefits, and it's her only income, and she expects me to pay child support too because SSDI isn't counted as income, which really isn't fair.
So it may not be counted as income, but it can be an offset to child support. So typically whoever is receiving that, that's going to be an offset to their child support when the child support is calculated.
Okay.
That is one of those things that a lot of people don't know, and I've had to argue with a lot of attorneys on it, but there is case law out there to support it. So you want to dig into that because if it's SSDI, if it's specifically for the child, it can be considered an offset to the child support when it's being calculated. So it may not be included as income, but it does need to be deducted out of it.
So it's going to be counted at somehow or another. It's going to be counted.
It is.
Okay, very good. All right, again, get those questions in. Ask at DeWittLaw.com. Let's get to our Mo Pro tip of the week. What do you have for us this week, Mo?
So this one's maybe a little bit more obscure, but I thought it was somewhat interesting. A lot of times when we're doing settlement agreements, whether it's a personal injury case or if you settle a case with a contractor or whatever it may be, one side may ask for a confidentiality clause, basically saying, hey, you're not allowed to talk about this agreement, so on and so forth. Now, one of the important things, if you're ever considering an agreement that talks about a confidentiality clause, is you want to put an amount on the amount they're paying for the confidentiality. And here's the reason why. And this actually stems out of a case a number of years ago where Dennis Rodman, who used to play for the Chicago Bulls, obviously, hit a cameraman, and the cameraman sued him.
Yes.
And so the big question here is the settlement taxable? Is it taxable as income tax under the IRS code? And typically, in most cases, if the settlement is for physical injuries, then it's not taxable.
Okay.
But if it's for lost wages, then it could be taxable. The problem in this case was they had a confidentiality clause that meant he couldn't talk about any part of the settlement, and there was no dollar amount assigned to the confidentiality portion. So in that case, the IRS ultimately determined, since they couldn't decide or couldn't determine which was for physical injuries and which may be for lost wages or which may be for confidentiality, they taxed the whole thing.
Oh, man.
So that's why you want to assign a dollar amount on the confidentiality portion, and then the rest is assigned for physical injuries or whatever else it may be, because that prevents that issue from happening.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's a little bit obscure. I don't know if it's something a lot of people out there would encounter on a day-to-day basis, but I bet there's one person out there who may be going through something or maybe just doesn't know that. Personally, I think it's interesting, but I think a lot of weird stuff is interesting. So.
I would have had no idea to even, I wouldn't even know to consider something like that. It's like, here, sign this, we're done, here's your payout or whatever like that. And then I go in and get taxed on a crazy amount. Like, wait a minute. So definitely good advice. The Mo Pro tip of the week right there. All right, Mo, best way for people to get in touch with you, to be a part of the show, how can they reach out and touch base with you?
So if you have a legal question, you can always give us a call at 407-53-MOSES. That's 407-536-6737. Leave a voicemail. We'll answer it right here on the show, or email us. I think most people prefer to email us. They don't like the sound of our voice like I don't like the sound of my voice. You can email us, ask@dewittlaw.com. But always, if you need something, give us a call during the week. 1-800-DeWitt-LAW. That's 1-800-339-4885. We're there to answer your questions. Or if it's not something we handle, we'll point you in the right direction, try to get you referred over to an attorney who can help you.
Make sure you're always in good hands. You can also check them out online, DeWittLaw.com, DEWITT law.com. We'll be back again next Sunday. You've been listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
Right now, you guys, come to the stage. Please welcome Mo DeWitt. Mo DeWitt from the DeWitt Law Firm. Agent on go, just call Mo. Mo DeWitt, everybody.
What's going on, Ross?
Thank you, Ross. I just want to thank all you guys for coming out tonight. It's been a great event for a great cause. It's all for the Yellow Brick Road. If you don't know what that is, look them up, ybrf.org. I think we got Juan and Trey in here tonight from there. So thank you for raising money for them. Thank you for coming out, and I hope you guys are enjoying the show. That's all I got to say. Thank you, Mo. Mo DeWitt, everybody. Get over, Mo.